threatened to punch a man in the face. I have been reflecting a lot on a recent episode that honestly shook me to the core. Though it probably shouldn't have, given my long history of friction with men who assume I'm here to take orders from them. To give some context, I have always insisted on autonomy over my body and my decisions. My interactions with men have reinforced how irritating some of them can find this. If I look back over the years, I see a pattern. Whenever I've been challenged by a man about how I dress, how I behave, or how I react to personal decisions, I usually push back. I don't cower. Possibly that's because I learned early on that if a man tries to cross a physical boundary, like laying hands on me in anger, my best and safest bet is to get away from him fast. I do not linger. The very first time it happened, I was in my late teens, and I remember thinking, no, absolutely not. We're done. And that rule stuck with me ever since. I was strangled once at my job, a hospital environment, or at least a clinic, dealing with patients who can sometimes be violent or unpredictable. The details of that incident are too raw and painful to detail in full, but suffice it to say, I came face to face with the realization that some men simply see women as objects or lesser beings, easily subjected to physical intimidation. The patient pinned me by the throat, and it took the help of security to tear him off me. Months have passed and I still get flashbacks now and then. The experience hammered in the notion that I have to be on guard, that I have to be prepared to assert my boundaries swiftly, and sometimes even threaten self-defense if it comes to that. But let me cut to the immediate story. I accompanied my husband on a trip to a car dealership in some remote area heavily aligned with conservative or raid politics. He had his own reasons for going there. The brand of car he wanted was apparently cheaper or more readily found in that region. Maybe it was a dealership known for a certain brand. I didn't fully track the details. We hopped in the car that morning. My husband excited about the purchase, me somewhat ambivalent, because it was really his affair. He was using his own money, separate from mine, to buy the vehicle. Frankly, I didn't care. I was mostly there as a passenger, not a participant. When we arrived, the dealership was a smallish, run-down-looking place with only a handful of cars on the lot. Inside, the waiting area was surprisingly large. A row of seats, a table with stale magazines, and one of those single-serve coffee machines. The walls had cheap wood paneling. Possibly the building was quite old. You could see random posters of trucks, some bright red, some big promotions that probably expired months ago. My husband went off to speak with a salesman about the car, leaving me at my own devices in the waiting area. Another guy, someone not in dealership uniform, was hanging around near the front desk, maybe a friend of the owner or some local fixture who liked to kill time in that place. I spotted him earlier as we walked in, perched on a plastic chair, scanning me with a glance that gave me a slight twinge of discomfort. I meandered over to the coffee machine, figuring I'd pass the time with a warm cup. I'd already noticed a slight tension in the air. The men behind the desk gave me polite but guarded looks, possibly reading me as an outsider to their usual clientele. "You can help yourself to coffee," one of them said stiffly. That was no problem. I was glad enough to get something to sip. So there I was, fiddling with the machine, reading the labels on the coffee pods, trying to pick one that wasn't too stale or unappealing. My mind drifted to the frustration I'd been living with. My job stress, the memory of being strangled, the sense that men around me so often see me as lesser. And ironically, it was in that moment I caught a random voice. "Hey, your shoes are untied." I glanced down. True enough, I wear these old paint-crusted sneakers that have short laces, too short to tie properly. I've been leaving them untied for over a year because they never fall off. The laces never drag, and it's just more comfortable for me. The paint is from some home renovation I did months ago, and I never bothered to replace the shoes. They still do their job. I certainly don't trip on the laces, so it's a conscious choice. I keep them untied. I turned to see that the one who made the remark was that older gentleman I'd noticed earlier, the buddy or random occupant, possibly 60, heavy-set, exuding that air of "I own the place." The initial comment might have been well-meaning if he'd stopped there, but the tone was off, like a weird paternal or condescending vibe. I told him simply, "I know, I don't tie them. They're fine as is." He stared at me, eyebrows raised, as though I'd spoken in a foreign language. Then he said something about how it's not safe or not proper, or some nonsense about me needing to do as a man suggests. I can't recall the exact words, but it was definitely an insinuation that I was ignoring rightful instructions. I started feeling that prickle of annoyance. I was in no mood to debate shoe tying with a complete stranger, so I gave a polite but firm response. I'm good, thanks. I returned to picking my coffee pod, determined to ignore him. Meanwhile, my husband came around the corner. He was finishing some initial talk with the salesman. The older man turned to my husband, evidently wanting backup. Don't you want your wife to tie her shoes? She might trip or something. My husband, bless him for once, said calmly. She's a grown woman. She can do what she wants. It's not my job to tell her. That, ironically, is more respectful than he sometimes is. Maybe because he sensed how silly the conversation was. But the older man's face twisted in confusion, as though the concept of a husband not ordering his wife around was foreign to him. Then he said something like, "Wait, you defy your husband," with an incredulous tone. I rolled my eyes, saying, "I defy whoever I want. Not that I owe you an explanation." Maybe it came off snarky, but I was done with the bullshit. At that point, I guess the older man decided to forcibly make me tie my shoes. He heaved himself out of the chair and started moving toward me, arms extended like he was about to physically do it himself. I felt a surge of alarm. The memory of being strangled at work flashed through my mind. A man grabbing me without consent. Reflexively, I raised my voice. "If you come any closer, I'm punching you in the face." My pulse hammered in my chest. The dealership staff froze, I think. My husband even took a step back, as if he wasn't sure how to handle it. But the older man halted, hands up in a slight surrender pose, mumbling something I didn't fully catch. Possibly an offended, "Well, excuse me," or "No need to be a bitch," or something like that. I was too keyed up to process it. I was ready to swing if he so much as touched my foot. I turned away, coffee forgotten, and marched out the door, heading to the parking lot for air. My breath came in ragged gasps. I realized that might seem like an overreaction, but after the experiences I've had, men ignoring my words or forcibly imposing their will, I wasn't about to let some random old dude physically handle me. Hell no. I paced around outside, partly trembling with leftover adrenaline, partly furious that I had to stand up for something so ridiculously petty as how I tie or don't tie my shoes. My husband eventually came out looking sheepish, telling me that the guy was now heckling me under his breath from inside. I said I didn't care. Let him heckle. He's lucky I didn't land a punch the second he moved to approach me. In that moment, I felt a swirl of anger, relief, and sadness. Anger that my day was hijacked by some bozo who felt entitled to boss me around. Relief that I'd set a boundary and stopped him from crossing it physically. Sadness because it reminded me how pervasive misogyny can be. Like, it's just shoes, for God's sake. But the man insisted on making it an issue, turning it into a power play. Defy your husband. The question replays in my head, dripping with an archaic assumption that a wife is a subservient figure who must comply. The sheer audacity is galling. Of course, after a few minutes, I cooled off enough to go back in and slink around, while my husband finished the car purchase. The older man mostly kept a distance of several feet. No apology, though. No sign of contrition. I gave him the side-eye now and then, refusing to speak. The tension was thick. The dealership staff seemed uncertain whether to intervene, but I guess no one dared wade into it. Finally, once the paperwork was done, we left, with me spitting good riddance in my head. That was that. Once in our own car, I ranted to my husband. That was messed up. He literally tried to corner me physically over my shoes. If I hadn't threatened him, God knows how that might have gone. My husband shrugged, said the guy was old and set in his ways. Typical small-town nonsense. He told me I was kind of intense, but he wasn't really upset. If anything, he seemed mildly amused, though he tried to hide it. Maybe a part of him appreciated that I can handle myself. Still, the incident left me feeling drained. In my head, I was replaying that man's stance, arms out, as if he was about to forcibly bend down and tie my shoes. The nerve. I guess, from an outsider's vantage, it might look like an odd overreaction, but this is the accumulation of experiences. When you've been touched in anger, pinned, strangled, or had men try to coerce you physically, you develop a hair trigger for self-defense. The day he moved those steps forward, I saw an immediate threat. That memory of the patient strangling me at my workplace flashed through my head, a sense of, no, not again, never again. So I roared back with threat. I'm not proud of it, but I also feel I had no other immediate choice. Telling him calmly, "Please do not approach me," might have worked, but given the rage inside me, the words that came out were, "I will punch you." So be it. I don't regret my outburst. If that's what keeps random men from thinking they can physically handle me, fine. Let them be. uncomfortable. Let them sense that women can and will defend themselves. Because truly, I'm sick of the assumption that we're docile or malleable. This small fiasco with the untied shoes is just a microcosm for the bigger issues. The sexist attitude that men have the right to direct or correct women. The intrusion into personal space. The disregard for our no. Now, I'm left with simmering thoughts about concealed carry. I half joked about it on the drive home, telling my husband I might as well get a permit. The day might come when a more dangerous man tries to push me physically in a deserted lot or a dark street, and I want to protect myself. It's messed up, but that's how unsafe I feel sometimes. The notion that some men interpret a simple refusal, "I don't want to tie my shoes," as an affront, a personal challenge, and respond by physically stepping in to force the matter is horrifying. If one day that escalates, I'd prefer to have the means to defend my body. Maybe that's the cynicism in me talking, but it's how I rationalize it. Anyway, that's what happened. Over a trivial detail, my untied shoes, I was told to comply, refused, and ended up threatening to punch a man in the face. Now that I've had time to reflect, part of me wonders if I should have tried to diffuse it differently. Another part insists, no, he stepped into your physical space uninvited. That's a line crossed. My heart still pounds recalling it, but also, I have a grim satisfaction. He didn't expect me to stand up for myself. He thought I'd let him do as he pleased. He was proven wrong. And so I share this, hoping other women understand that even small acts of defiance can spark big confrontations, especially with men who cling to old-school patriarchal mindsets. But we're allowed to draw boundaries, and if that means threatening to use force when someone tries to handle us physically, so be it. Let them think twice next time. Let them realize we're not accessories to be corrected or guided. If that man is now slightly intimidated or regrets his arrogance, good. Maybe the next time he sees a woman wearing undone laces, he'll mind his own damn business. Or maybe not, but at least I made it clear that I'm not some passive prop in his worldview. The final tidbit, that sense of he deserves to fear me, lingers. Normally I prefer to say, fear isn't the goal, but in this moment, I do believe men like that need a jolt. If my reaction helps caution him against imposing on another woman, I see it as a positive. People might think me extreme, but I suspect many women who have experienced repeated boundary violations understand exactly where I'm coming from. So that's the story of how I threatened to punch a man in the face at a car dealership, all because he insisted I tie my shoes. It's a microcosm of bigger issues: bodily autonomy, sexist entitlement, and the raging desire to stand up for myself in a world that often tries to break me down. I did what I had to do, and I stand by it.